Okay, we are live on Facebook. We did it. And let me go ahead and make sure that we share that. Okay. Okay, Julia, we are live, and thank you so much. We are here and really honored to be joined by New York State Senator for the 18th District in New York, Julia Salazar. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Reverend Miranda. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
And the pleasure is all ours. So it's getting exciting. Tomorrow is election day. So I just want to remind everyone who is joining us and those who will watch later on tonight that tomorrow is June 23rd. So it's election time. And as I've always told everyone, it's important to go and vote. People suffered, people actually, some people even died, right? So that we could have the right to vote. Really important to vote. So the way that we're going to do this, Julia, is that we're going to go ahead and give you 2 to 3 minutes for you to go ahead and do an opening statement. Then I have some questions, and we're also going to be keeping an eye out on Facebook. And anyone who has a question, please feel free to put it in the comment section. Put a question on there. We will go ahead and then ask you that question. That sounds good?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. So we are on, and the internet is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to, certainly it's an honor to be the representative for the State Senate District in North Brooklyn, but also to be able to support the work that the New York State Chaplain Task Force does, and to be able to work together with you. My name is State Senator Julia Salazar, and I am the youngest woman to have been elected to the State Senate in the history of the State Senate. I was elected for the first time in 2018 at the age of 27. And in the time since then, I've become the chair of the Women's Issues Committee in the State Senate. I also serve on the Environmental Conservation Committee, the Elections Committee, Social Services Committee, Children and Families, and the Housing Committee as well in the State Senate. So those are some of the policy areas that I primarily focus on. It really has been an honor to represent this district, even in a time that has been very challenging for many of our neighbors. We know that Brooklyn has been hit disproportionately harder than most places in the entire world by this pandemic. But I've also been really proud and encouraged to see our communities come together and support each other through the last several months. And to be able to be a part of that, from delivering meals and personal protective equipment to seniors and to those who need it, to people coming together and even just checking on each other, making sure that everyone is doing well. And I see that as central to the work that I do as a public servant, that my office and my team do every day, but also the work that you are doing every day and that other faith leaders are doing across the state every day. And so I think what I really want people to know is that there are people who love them and care about them, including myself and my team. We are here to not only serve their material needs and make sure that everyone has access to the resources and services they're entitled to, and to continue advocating for them in Albany, but also to make sure that they know that we're also always here to listen and to provide any support that they need, or to give them access to the support that they need.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, your team has been everywhere. We keep bumping into them. Most recently at PPE distribution, I believe in one of the housing areas in Brooklyn district. And they're always incredibly helpful. And I know that you have been busy doing the same thing. So a lot of people, I guess, will agree with me that the handling of the COVID-19, obviously pandemic, at the top, right, in Washington, wasn't incredibly well done, to say the least. How have you? However, a lot of people agree with me that the governor's actually stepped up and did a fairly good job at keeping us in tune with each other and updated and things of that sort. What were you, and you just mentioned a few, but if you can go a little deeper, what were you able to do for your district during this time?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, because you had mentioned that my team and I have been present in housing developments in the district, I represent about 340,000 people. I sometimes say that I have 340,000 children that I take the responsibility of representing a large district really seriously. But also I represent 25 housing developments, NYCHA developments, specifically public housing developments across the district, which spans from Greenpoint and Williamsburg, all of Bushwick, part of Bed-Stuy and Brownsville, Cypress Hills, where I live, and East New York. And so because these are some of the hardest areas or hardest hit areas in the state, what that really looks like is our local hospitals, primarily Woodhull and Wyckoff Hospital, have been really overburdened with trying to address the number of cases. So sometimes it means going to those hospitals and serving meals to the essential workers who are working around the clock. Even people from outside of the city and outside of the state have come here. And it's on the one hand, of course, it's urgent and it's a devastating situation. But on the other hand, it has been very encouraging and inspiring to see people give up their time and their resources and their skills as medical professionals to help people that they don't know, and help a community that they aren't from. And so it's been great to be able to support them, also to be in the housing developments, distributing meals, distributing masks, hand sanitizer, making sure that one of the biggest tasks has been handling the enormous increase in unemployment claims. It's slowed down a little bit, but initially we were essentially functioning as a sort of satellite office for the Department of Labor in order to process all of these claims. We've seen more people unemployed in New York State than we've seen since the Great Depression. So it is a really severe crisis, and thankfully, I think we are on the path to defeating this pandemic, but we're not quite out of the woods. And so it's important that all of us continue the work that we're doing, and every single person has an individual role in this, whether it's wearing your mask, it's maintaining social distance, it's staying home when possible, and the way that you and I are doing right now, doing things virtually when we're able to. And then the bonus of that is sometimes we have the ability to reach more people than we would if we were in a defined space.
Yeah, and today happens to be the actual official, right, first day of reopening. So we are praying and we are meditating and whatever else everyone does, that things go well. And so far, I'm praying that people can get their businesses back in order. But what you're saying to me, what I hear you saying, is that people like yourself were able to kind of fill in the gap where our government kind of failed, right? This particular administration kind of failed, and the governors and the assembly people and the senators like yourself were able to kind of pick up the slack, right, in many ways, and it's a lot better for a lot of people. And I want to, for one, thank you for what you've done in our community in Williamsburg.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's unfortunate. I know that our local congressional representatives have been fighting hard in New York to advocate for our state, and yet the situation, the administration at the federal level is not too fond of our state, and it's very unfortunate that that in such a devastating situation, where in Brooklyn alone, for example, we've lost nearly 5,000 people to this virus, in conditions like that people would play politics, and turn to a degree turn a blind eye to the suffering that we've seen in New York. But it at the same time has given us the opportunity to step up at the local level, at the state level. And the governor has in many ways been leading beyond New York State through this crisis, people tuning in every day to his pressers and just making sure that people have the most up-to-date, constant information. And each and every one of us knows how to play the role that we have respectively in the crisis.
I said in one of my, well, not so recent anymore, but early on when COVID started, in one of my sermons, I said that this pandemic would bring out the worst in humanity and would also bring out the best in humanity. And I think that at this point, we can see that it has. And how can, at what point do we stop playing politics, right? When it comes to lives and when it really comes to our moral compass. But again, yourself and others like you did a great job in that area. And I'm very, very thankful. And I look forward to your continued success. Again, those that are logged, I just want to mention that tomorrow is June 23rd. I'm here with Julia Salazar, our New York State Senator from the 18th District. And she's up for re-election tomorrow, so don't forget to vote. Julia, people saw the murder of George Floyd on video. It was a murder. There's nothing more that I can say. And you know my background. I am a chaplain for law enforcement. And as my mother taught me as a young man, the hand, you can't hide the heavens with your hand. The truth is the truth. And what we saw was murder. You watch this video, you've seen what's been going on. I actually met up with you at a couple of the protests. We spoke together. You've seen the riots, you've seen the looting. Tell us a little bit more about your take on all of this.
Yeah, it's deeply unfortunate, but we know that this is the result of systemic racism, and it is unfortunately not limited to law enforcement, and the origin of it is not law enforcement. Our country has a history that I appreciate you mentioning that sometimes we don't want to recognize this, especially when we see it among people who, when we see racism or racist violence committed by people who we otherwise would break bread with, and people who are our neighbors. It's very uncomfortable to reckon with this, but we have to, because it's the only way that it's ever going to change, right? If we hold our communities accountable and those who are perpetuating this systemic racism, and it is not by any means exclusive to law enforcement. It's really endemic in our society, and as we all know, it didn't begin with George Floyd. There's absolutely no doubt that that Black Americans are targeted by racist violence. I'll start by saying that before I ran for office or even considered running for office, I was a community organizer for a nonprofit within the Communities Unite for Police Reform Coalition. And so my daily work was advocating to legislators, city and state legislators, to pass policies that would bring more accountability in the police department, build more trust with the community, and also try to achieve some kind of justice for families like those of George Floyd or Ramarley Graham, who was, a young unarmed Black man who was killed in his apartment in the Bronx, or Delron Small, who is a young unarmed Black man who was killed in central Brooklyn. We could go on and on. Certainly the case of Eric Garner, which has a striking and horrifying similarity to that of George Floyd. It's only natural that people would respond with anger. And I think it's okay at once to recognize that anger is completely valid and reasonable. And at the same time, as leaders, we have a responsibility to say, where do we go from here? How do we respond to this to try to prevent this from happening to another man like George Floyd, to another person? What can we do in our positions of power to recognize each other's humanity and ensure that we are treating each other, regardless of the situation, in a humane way? Sometimes, people will talk about whether or not a person who was ultimately fatally killed by law enforcement, if that person or somebody who was in immigration custody, right, if that person had committed a crime. That's the wrong question, frankly, to be asking, right? Because we all need to recognize each other's humanity and our right to live, and even regardless of the mistakes that we've made, or the need for people to be held accountable for their actions. And so I think that I feel a responsibility as a legislator to ensure that the law reflects that commitment. In the past month, we reconvened the legislature to pass a series of bills, including finally making it illegal. It shocked a lot of people that it was not already illegal to use a chokehold. I think it may even have shocked some officers because, responsible officers don't, they do not resort naturally to violence when trying to de-escalate in a situation, or when they're called as a first responder. But actually it had not been codified in the law. And so we had to pass a bill in order to say, no, it is against the law. It is not only against NYPD policy, which it was, but it is against the law to use a chokehold in this way, right? We also repealed something called Section 50A, which was a little bit more controversial, but it was extremely important to the families of people who had been victims of police violence. I remember spending time with those families in my previous role before I ran for office, such as Gwen Carr, the mother of Eric Garner, and being in meetings with her where she would plead with the mayor and the commissioner the police commissioner at the time and say, she just wanted basic information about what happened on the day that her son was killed. And she couldn't get that information because of the particular use of this section of the civil rights law. And that is why it was important for us to repeal it, while also making sure that we're protecting the basic rights and privacy of public servants and law enforcement. So those are, that's just one example, but I think there's more that each and every one of us can do, and there's more that we can do as policymakers to protect each other, and to really critically think about what public safety is, and how we can reflect that in the law in our society.
Right. And in an equal way for everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, regardless of race. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, regardless of race, right? Or even social economic standing, just regardless, just humanity at its best, and we can do that. So lately, I've been a chaplain now for 25 years, the last 10 years in law enforcement, and so I've been having to explain, the police side of things for a lot of people. It's not easy. There's not one cop that you will speak to that will tell you or agree with what happened in Minneapolis. At the same time, we have people calling for dismantling of the police department, defunding of the police department, abolish the police department. Where do you stand on this?
I do. So I think that it's important for us to have a nuanced perspective on this. And I approach the issue from the starting point of evaluating how much money within the city budget, for example, is currently invested in law enforcement. And then within that investment, within the NYPD's budget, how are those funds being used? And also, what are we asking law enforcement to do that might not be appropriate for law enforcement to be doing? I think about the case of a man named Mohammed Ba, who, the son of Hawa Ba. He lived in central Brooklyn. He was suffering, he was having a mental health crisis. He had no history of violence, for one, but also he was alone in his apartment. His mom was concerned about him. She called 911 to try to get help for her son. And ultimately her son was killed, right? And this is not a typical situation, but in order for us to avoid the rare and devastating situations like that, we need to consider why are we having to, where are our priorities? Why are we relying on police officers to resolve a mental health crisis that someone who is not, who otherwise is not violent, when they're in crisis, why are the police the first people who go to them rather than a health professional, right? And so on the question of defunding the police, I think a lot of people hear this term and they think it means completely slash the NYPD budget, which I know that a lot of the communities that I represent are not demanding that. People, it varies, right? Some people don't feel safe around the police for justifiable reasons, but other people, they feel comforted by the presence of the police, and at least by knowing that they can call the police if they need protection, and certainly that's the case for a lot of young women, and the women who I'm engaging with on a regular basis who are suffering from domestic violence or gender-based violence. So then the question is, well, what do we do, if anything? And I believe that we can think more critically about what the funds that are currently allocated to the NYPD are being used for, and say, okay, if it isn't appropriate for those funds to be used for this purpose, such as addressing mental health or behavioral health, where can those funds go instead? We're keeping them in the city, right? But can they go to service providers, and then and create a more cohesive response and solution to people's problems, so that it is both supporting public safety without unnecessarily criminalizing people, and having people, our neighbors, end up in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, listen, I agree with you. I think that in many ways we have police officers who are trained for one thing being asked to do other things. That perhaps we can go ahead and create other, even within the city, agencies that can go ahead and take those calls, those particular calls. I know that domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous calls that police officers get. And they're difficult because a lot of it deals with deeper rooted issues, as you and I both know. And so perhaps having a different, I don't know, just a different type of face showing up, at that scenario, at that moment. Again, we're talking about totally nonviolent. It's not where someone's life is in critical danger, but having a different type of a face show up at the door might make the difference. Something that I've discussed, so if, for people who see defunding in this way, where we can actually allocate money to so that the services can be provided by people that are actually more professional in those areas, healthcare, mental health care professionals in those areas. That is something that we should take a really good look at, a really good look at it. I think it would take a lot of pressure off of a lot of these police officers who are not necessarily trained as mental health professionals. Think about it. They're not trained as domestic violence professionals. So this is something that we could, I think that we could really good look at, really good look at. So I deal with clergy, obviously, and there's a lot of clergy in your community, and some that are helpful, some that are not. And so how do you see the role of clergy working along now with this? I mean, we're living in historic times, right? So we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And we're in the middle of a major Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so we're seeing history being made right before our eyes. We're part of it. So what is the role of clergy? I mean, how do you see clergy helping out in the communities? And how do you see it? How do you see it that you can best partner with clergy in terms of these times and helping within the community?
Well, what I immediately think of is the fact that clergy are community leaders, just like a camp counselor, a teacher, a sports coach, right? Or a community board chair. Clergy are leaders in their communities, and when people are experiencing a crisis, whether it's a personal crisis or the crisis that we have all collectively been facing over the past few months, it's those community leaders who people want to know that they can rely on. When it comes to, I think on a more personal level, in some of the check-in calls that I've been doing, especially to seniors, knowing that a lot of people are isolated at home and having to adjust to that, I hear that people are experiencing loneliness. And when you're experiencing loneliness, it isn't just an emotional crisis sometimes, but it can be a spiritual crisis. And people start to ask really important questions that all of us probably ask at some point in our lives, like why are we here? Questions about purpose, sort of existential questions. And who better to answer those questions? I mean, the first people I think of are spiritual leaders and clergy. And so it's really important that people know about the resource that they have through the Chaplains Task Force and through their local clergy leaders to lean on them in times like this. Like that's exactly the work that you all, it's your life's work, right? It's the work that you are dedicated to doing in order to support people through times like this, because we all need that kind of support throughout our lives. And I think it's really important. I witnessed when I was growing up, particularly the men in my family's from Colombia, sometimes the men in my family being afraid to seek that kind of help. And I would watch them suffer in silence sometimes, and be afraid to be vulnerable, right? And it has to do with misconceptions about masculinity and about the role, like a masculine role in the family. But it doesn't need to be that way. And it isn't, of course, it's not only men, it's not only, Latino communities who experience this,
Sure.
but a lot of people and a lot of our neighbors are experiencing that and sort of wrestling with it on a regular basis, thinking, I really wish that I could talk to someone about this, and having these deep spiritual questions that spiritual leaders can answer, and talk them through. And it's very important that people know that they have that they have clergy leaders in our communities who will support them through that.
I hope so. That's the reason that I founded and we launched the New York State Chaplain Task Force in 2011, was because I saw the work that we were doing in hospitals and in the military and in law enforcement, and I said to myself, Why can't we make this available to all people in the community, on the community level, at the grassroots level, where people can actually have access to spiritual care if they want it, but it's safe spiritual care, where you're going to actually meet with someone who's not going to push their worldviews on you or not going to proselytize or evangelize, but really just care about your soul. And I think that in many ways, I think that this is an opportune time that we can actually play a major role as well with the way things are changing. That we can possibly, teams like ours can actually take some weight off the police department, right? By handling certain situations that we are trained for. It's what we do, and we've been doing it for a long time. We are on with Julia Salazar, New York State Senator for the 18th District. And I just want to let everybody know that please, if you have any questions for the senator, please go ahead and put them in the comments section. We will go ahead and relay them to her. There's a lot of people on, Senator, a lot of shares. So I'm really happy about that because I think that this is important. Tomorrow is Election Day, June 23rd. I'm asking everyone to go out there. My interpretation, Senator, of separation of church and state is not that we don't get involved, right? So as clergy, I believe, in my theology at least, is that we should be involved with social justice. And so elections provide us an opportunity to have a say. And who is providing services, right? And who's caring for our communities. And so tomorrow is very, very important. I can't tell you how important it is. And you're up for re-election. And tomorrow's election day. So we're asking people to go out there and vote. And as I've always said, people have died so that we could have the right to vote. So please go and vote tomorrow. If you still have one of those absentee ballots in your house, you can still get it, postmarked. It has to be by the 23rd. Get it postmarked, get it out there for everyone, for your abuelita, for, for that person that can't get out. Please help them to get their votes and have their voices heard. So how we doing with questions? All right. We actually have a question here, Senator. This question is coming from Jose Colon. And the question is, when you get elected, what's your take on people coming to New York from other states that reopened too early, and the fact that the virus is getting out of control in these other states as we speak?
Yeah. Well, I should add that I'm currently the state senator, and so I already feel a responsibility to address these questions about the process of reopening and how we can do it safely, because there is a completely valid concern about us being hit by a second wave of the virus. But basically, the most important thing is that we continue to implement the practices that we have in New York, because our state has seen the highest number of by far the highest number of cases, and unfortunately the highest number of deadly cases, and that has decreased a lot. Our hospitalizations are steadily still decreasing, and it's getting better each day. In the meantime, I think it's correct that some states chose to fully reopen a little bit prematurely, and it would be wise for the state to really limit travel just until we can confirm that the cases are under control and below a very low threshold in some of those states, because we at least now know roughly the incubation period of the virus, right? That if somebody thinks they were exposed, even if they don't show symptoms, that they should be quarantined for at least a couple of weeks. And so those are the kind of questions that we should be asking when people are traveling from another state where the cases are increasing. I recognize that people deserve to be able to travel. A lot of people have family outside of the state. And we don't want to prevent them from traveling, especially, God forbid, people lose family members. They want to be there for the funeral. They want to be there for a wedding and for those special times in people's lives. But we also have to think about public health and all of our safety first and foremost. So I think that limiting travel when it comes to that is really a necessary first step. And we should continue every day to monitor the number of cases in other states.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's far from over. So I keep telling everyone to continue to wear face covering and continue to practice social distancing. And even though we are reopening and many of our houses of worship are really happy, I've been trying to a lot of my colleagues and let them know to be easy, not to go in this full force, to continue to practice, take the temperatures at the door, get the place sanitized before you reopen, all these things that we can do to help, it's helping our communities as well. So I think that's important. We are on with Julia Salazar, and she is our current New York State Senator. She said it for the 18th District. And so she's not only up for reelection, but she's working because she is our current senator. And you've been doing an amazing job, Julia. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that an employer who fires an individual merely for being gay or transgender defies the law. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is really important. All of us should be able to do dignified work, and we should be able to earn a living and live productive lives. And we shouldn't be discriminated based on our gender identity or our sexuality, right? Regardless of anyone's personal beliefs about sexuality, about gender identity, it is not for us to impose that on other people, but particularly to impose it on other people through hiring or firing, and sort of gatekeeping on who is part of the workforce or not. I really think this is another step toward ensuring that all of our neighbors, regardless of gender or sexuality or any other identity, have the ability to pursue their destiny and to live freely and fully participate in the workforce and in our society. It's especially important right now, given that so many people have lost their jobs, so many families are suffering. We can only imagine how devastating it would be for someone to be discriminated against based on their gender or sexuality or any other aspect of who they are.
That's right. That's right. And we're talking about livelihood. We're talking about keeping people from their livelihood because of their gender or sexuality or because of what they want to present as or identify as. And I think that's so I think it's a victory. I think we both agree that that's a major victory. And so we recently had one with DACA. What do you say about that?
Yeah.
That was quite.
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, right? I don't take any of the victories that we win for our undocumented neighbors for granted under this administration. It's a victory for young people, and especially for young people whose families immigrated to this country, who are immigrants themselves and who are just trying to pursue an education and to have autonomy over their destiny in this country. So while I'm cautiously optimistic, I think that we can't let our guard down, and we have to continue to fight until we finally live in a place where people don't have to live in fear for their survival because of their immigration status. This past year in 2019, I was very proud to be in the state Senate and part of passing the DREAM Act to make sure that at least in New York State, people would be able to pursue an education regardless of their immigration status and be eligible for the same support as people who were born in this country. Also for the passage finally of the green light legislation, which had been held up for a long time, to make sure that people are not discriminated based on their immigration status when it comes to driving a car or getting a driver's license, which also, as a secondary benefit of that, it makes our streets safer, and it is good for our economy. It helps more people be able to be independent and get to work and bring their kids to school. and all the various ways that all of us need to be able to have mobility and travel confidently in our own neighborhoods. So there's much more that needs to be done. I'm really pleased by the victories that have been won, thanks to advocates, thanks to the grassroots, thanks to people in our own communities in Bushwick and Williamsburg and Brooklyn, all over the city. A lot of people were fighting for over a decade, simply for people to have the ability, regardless of their immigration status, to drive a car. There's much more that we still need to be doing to make sure that that people aren't separated from their families and that everyone is treated like a human being and with dignity.
So I guess we agree that it's definitely a step in the right direction, but
Yeah.
we are guard, right? We have a long way to go. So we are here with Julia Salazar, our senator for the 18th district. Again, any questions, please put them in the comments. And thank you for joining us, all those that are watching right now, and for those who are going to watch later on as well. So we hear it said, Julia, that politics is dirty, that politicians can't be trusted. Don't worry, I hear the same thing about clergy.
Right.
As well. And that's the thing, right? You're always going to go ahead and in many cases, you're going to pack everybody into the same bag, right? Or they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I guess it comes with the field. But you hear it said that they're dirty. You hear that they can't be trusted, and in many cases, they're justified to think so. How have you gone about, right? So this is not, you've been doing it, and how will you continue to go on restoring the people's trust?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to affirm that it's completely reasonable that people would be wary of politicians. We've seen it, unfortunately, in the past in our own communities in Brooklyn, but we've seen it everywhere, that often power corrupts when accountability isn't present. So that, to me, is really the secret, is we need to be pursuing accountability all the time, and building our coalition of people who are involved in the electoral process and in the legislative process. For me as a legislator, it means that on any given issue, say that the issue is related to public education, related to curriculum, I want to be talking to students. I want to be talking to educators, right? To parents. This probably sounds like common sense, right? It seems completely intuitive, but
Right.
you might be surprised that legislators haven't always done this, right? Sometimes people, it's easier to just listen to the private interests that might be dominating the conversation or in your ear, as a legislator, maybe as a community leader, right? And so it takes constantly remembering, and even surrounding yourself by people who are going to hold you accountable. The people on my staff, on my team, my neighbors, people like yourself, leaders in the community who are going to make sure that that I'm doing right by the community, right? And that I then am in a position to hold my colleagues accountable and say, when a piece of legislation comes up that I don't think serves my community, certainly I can vote no, but I can do more and say, and speak up and say, this is going to have a negative impact on my constituents, right? People in my community are suffering. There is rapid gentrification happening in North Brooklyn, and it doesn't need to be this way. We need policies that are going to prevent this from happening, right? And I wouldn't be able to do that if I weren't accountable, first and foremost, to the people that I represent, to people like yourself and our neighbors. So while I think it's totally valid for people to not have a lot of trust in politicians, they don't necessarily need to, as a prerequisite, to engage in the electoral process. You don't need to trust politicians in order to make sure that your voice is heard at the ballot box tomorrow, for example. You don't need to trust politicians in order to call your state senator and say, this is how I feel about this issue. or I'm a constituent and I have this need. My gas has been turned off in my building, or whatever it could be. We really have a responsibility as elected leaders. It isn't just that I have these 340,000 children, but these 340,000, bosses, people who, my number one job is to serve my constituents. And so in that way, the structure is good. There's some accountability baked in, but for anyone who is concerned about whether they can trust their elected officials, it's completely valid. And the best way to address that is to talk to us and talk to whoever your elected official is, and make sure that your voice is heard. And it starts tomorrow in elections, but it's all the time. And then if you're not being heard, then you build power with your neighbors, and you make sure that you publicly hold them accountable.
Absolutely. So that people know, you're the senator, New York State senator for the 18th district. What areas does this cover, and what is the percentage in terms of race and ethnicities? What's the makeup in terms of the percentages?
Yeah, so the district includes part of East New York, all of Cypress Hills, part of Brownsville and Bed-Stuy, all of Bushwick, Williamsburg, and about half of Greenpoint. And demographically, that's roughly 50%, maybe a little more than 50% Latino, and about 20% Black. So it's predominantly people of color. The remaining 19-20% or so is a mix. But that's basically the makeup of the district. It's a lot of Puerto Rican New Yorkers, Dominican New Yorkers. I'm Colombian American. There are people from all over Latin America and all over the world who are represented in our district, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, so am I. It's quite diverse. Absolutely. So we're here with New York State Senator. We're almost done with New York State Senator. I know that you're very, very busy. Julia Salazar, New York State Senator for the 18th District. Tomorrow is Election Day, and our Senator Julia Salazar is up for re-election, so please go out and vote. So what makes you different than your opponents?
Yeah, well, I have one opponent in this election, and I want to allow him to speak for himself. To speak for myself, I don't come from a conventional political trajectory. I didn't work for a politician, for example. I was a community organizer before I ran for office, right? I mentioned earlier that I worked within the Communities United for Police Reform Coalition, mediating between families and law enforcement at times, talking to legislators, and sometimes really agitating legislators and pushing them to do the right thing, right? And to pass policies that benefit all of us. And having, coming from that perspective allowed me at some point to say, we need people in office who represent our interests. And I can't speak for my opponent per se, but I know that there is nothing more meaningful to me than public service. And my motivation has always been, I didn't think, I don't aspire to be what some people would call a career politician. I have always been passionate about public service, but that can, as you certainly know, that can take so many forms, and it doesn't just mean elected office, right? And so my motivation is aligned with serving our communities. And additionally, I'm sort of a policy wonk. I love to draft legislation, to ask all the questions, to really dig in and make sure that I know every single detail, because the detail, they say the devil is in the details. The details do matter, right? Sure. The details can have a huge impact, even when they seem small. And I've certainly witnessed that as a legislator. I think I uniquely have a quality of being very diligent in looking over legislation. And that's part of the reason why. So even as I'm in the Democratic conference in the state Senate, and we're the majority, and I feel very privileged to be in that position as a freshman senator, right? And a young senator to have that opportunity and actually craft and pass legislation. I've passed more than 20 bills in just a year and a half, which is a lot for any given senator.
Sure.
And legislation that that directly positively impacts our community. And it's also really, I've had this unique experience of allowing our neighbors in North Brooklyn to directly draft and inform legislation. And that's a really cool experience. One of my constituents in Greenpoint, for example, is a woman who is a survivor of sexual violence. And she drafted legislation called the Safeway Home Act, which I introduced with Assemblyman Lenthal. He was the lead sponsor in the Assembly with myself in the Senate. And it sounds very simple, but it's very meaningful for a lot of survivors of violence, that it just ensures that if you go to the hospital and report sexual violence, then you have a designated, protected, safe way to get home or to your safe place where you're staying when you leave the hospital, and it's paid for, right? So for people who might not have the means, or they're in a dangerous situation, they know that they'll be safe in this particularly vulnerable point in their life. And that's just one example, but I do think it's unique, and perhaps it shouldn't be. I think we need more and more legislators who are truly accountable to our constituents. And the whole purpose, what makes it a democratic process, is that each one of us is essentially a vessel for the hundreds of thousands of people that we represent. So I really, it truly is, it's the honor of my young life to get to do this work every single day. And it isn't just the legislative session through June, it's all year round. You'll see me and my team out in all corners of the district to make sure that that people are empowered, right? It's more than it certainly is constituent services, giving people what they need with the resources that we have, but it also is empowering people so that they are coming to Albany with me. Yeah.
All right. So we have a question here. This one is from Maria Teresa Monge. She is one of your constituents in Williamsburg. And she asks, it seems more and more that more and more of our seniors are unable to stay in their neighborhood and communities due to gentrification. I think you touched on this, and rent increases, etc. What's the conversation around this?
There is a pretty robust conversation around this. I would say I kind of break it up into two categories, right? Depending on on a senior's experience in their situation, right? Whether they are a tenant, a long-term tenant, so fighting to make sure that tenants are protected. I have legislation that I introduced at the beginning of last year, known as the Good Cause Eviction Bill. And the purpose of that legislation is to make sure that people are protected from what you would call an unconscionable rent increase at the end of their lease, something that would be sort of a de facto eviction. When there isn't a cause, right? Someone isn't a nuisance tenant, they pay their rent on time. Not everyone in the state, not even everyone in the city, has protections, even when they're just, paying their bills and trying to live their life. And so I introduced this legislation that we are still fighting to pass in the state Senate. In 2019, we also passed a package of legislation that primarily helps people who live in rent regulated housing, which is still hundreds of thousands of tenants in the city. It was important that we did that. However, the problem that we are seeing in North Brooklyn, especially, it's a combination of the gentrification that we've seen, people having to move out of their neighborhoods, even out of the city, because it's so unaffordable. That really is the result of in some cases, irresponsible rezonings, right? That we didn't have input from the community in shaping this momentous decision for our community. Or it's a result of previous loopholes in the rent laws, such as something called vacancy decontrol, that would actually incentivize the raising of rents at the end of leases, to deregulate an apartment and then make it impossible for a family, or certainly for a senior on a fixed income to stay there. So it's good that we finally closed some of those loopholes last year for regulated tenants. But we have more work to do, and I'm still continuing to fight to pass the bill that I introduced, the good cause eviction bill. Where I live in Cypress Hills, there are fewer. I actually am a tenant, but there isn't a lot of rental housing out here. It's a lot of homeowners, but as we all know, not all homeowners are in the same financial position. A lot of people out here are cash poor. Maybe they live in the home that their family had, but they're on a fixed income, and they're struggling. And there are, unfortunately, there are people who will take advantage of them, right? We all know seniors who have been victims of deed theft, or who've been sort of tricked into selling their home when they were in a vulnerable position for much less than their home was worth, and then they can't afford to move in Brooklyn, and they have to move somewhere else, or they're in an even scarier situation. But there are things that we can do policy-wise to prevent that. One thing I'm really excited to share that I haven't really shared publicly yet is that on July 1st, the Department of State is going to officially issue a cease and desist order for East New York. And the cease and desist order prevents predatory speculators from harassing homeowners locally who don't want to sell their homes. Sometimes you'll see advertisements, people get postcards in the mail. A lot of homeowners get them in the mail every single day. Phone calls, even people knocking on their doors when they don't want to sell their homes, right? It's a totally different issue if someone wants to sell their home, of course, but there are a lot of seniors who are struggling to stay here. And we want to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, and that they can continue to afford to live in our communities. And so then, there are other very important policies. A lot of people, I do want people to know, if you're a senior or a senior in your family, or someone that you love is struggling to be able to stay in their home, there are a lot of benefits and services available through your state senator's office, your council member. I want everyone to know that they can contact my office if they're struggling, whether they're a tenant or a homeowner, so that we can help. Because we know that we have an inequitable property tax system. A lot of seniors owe property taxes, or are just struggling to continue to pay the overhead costs of being a homeowner. And we want to be able to help them.
I think it's important. You mentioned something. I think it's important. People don't realize that many times you are watching out for your constituents, and you're introducing a bill that doesn't get passed. So it's not like you didn't try, but it just doesn't pass. And I think, are these bills listed on your website?
Yes. So if you go to newyorksenate.gov, you will be able to look up any of the senators, including myself. And if you look under legislation, you'll see all of the bills for the entire time that I've been in office, all of the bills that I've introduced. Several have, I'm proud that I've been able to pass legislation that's been signed into law, including most recently a bill to hold nursing homes accountable, make sure that they, and this was just last week that the governor signed the bill. Right. And also introduced with one of my local assembly members, to make sure that, because of how many deaths disproportionately we saw in nursing homes and residential facilities in New York State, we wanted to make sure that we don't see this if there is a second wave, or if there's just another similar pandemic or situation in the future. So we're requiring nursing homes to have a an emergency plan for pandemics, and also to always maintain a supply of at least 2 months worth of PPE for the residents.
Absolutely. Thank you for staying a little extra with us, Senator. I know we got started a little late because of technical difficulties. So we're almost done. There's a follow-up question to the last one, which is, how is this information for the seniors? How is that disseminated among seniors who often don't have someone to speak on their behalf?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I do is direct mail, making sure that people receive mail from our office, because often that is the most effective way to communicate with seniors, especially right now. We are making calls, but if we don't, if we don't know in the first place about someone's specific need, then naturally that isn't the best way. But we send out direct mail. It has my district office phone number on it, which I'll also share before we end, just to make sure everyone has knows how to reach us. But when it isn't a public health crisis, because these are unique circumstances, we actually will do house calls, and whenever it's safe to do so, we're also happy to do that. I'll go to senior centers right now. Again, it's a unique time, but typically you'll see me or my staff, any of our community liaisons out in all areas of the district to try to talk to people in person, especially for those who don't have email or don't use email. Sometimes a house call or a phone call or through the mail is the best way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It says a lot about us, right? As human beings, that we never forget our seniors, right? I mean, it says so much about us. So we are out of time. This has been an amazing time, Senator. I just want to let everybody know, thank you for joining us, first of all, and thank you to those who are going to join us later. Tomorrow is election day. I am here with New York State Senator for the 18th District, Julia Salazar, who has been doing an amazing job in her district, and I'm looking forward to her success. She's up for re-election. Tomorrow is election day, June 23rd, so please go out and vote. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and give you the last few minutes so that you can go ahead and do your closing statement.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Reverend Miranda, for being generous with your time, and for the work that you do every day, for being a leader in our community. And I hope that everyone who is watching and listening now or later watching the recorded interview, that they know that the New York State Chaplain Task Force is a resource for them. No matter who you are, it is a resource for you. And there are people who are ready to listen and to help you and support you without judgment. So our district office number, I just want to make sure everyone knows that we're here as a resource. The district office number is 718-573-1726. And you can also email me at salazar@nysenate.gov. I'm deeply honored to represent this district. I also want to just remind everyone one last time that tomorrow is election day. The polls are open from 6 a.m. in the morning until 9 p.m. at night. If you're online at 8:59, you stay in line. You will get to cast your vote. And remember, everyone, to continue to be safe in this new phase and transition back to some normalcy.
That's awesome. So I just want to go ahead and thank our Senator Julia Salazar for this time, for sharing, right? I know it's the night before an election day. So there's a lot going on. So we thank you for taking a little bit of your time to share with us. And I can tell that a lot of people are watching and sharing, and it'll stay on Facebook, by the way, so people can watch later on. But again, this has been some really trying times, and I think that you've rose to the occasion as a freshman senator. You rose to the occasion during a pandemic, and right now it seems like we're having some historic cultural movements as well, right? And with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think so. So we are living in some interesting times, scary times, but also historic times. And so thank you for all that you have done during this time. And I look forward again to your success and to working together for a better District 18.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Have a good
much.
night. God
Have a
bless you.
good night.
You too.
God
Take
bless
care.
you.
Bye-bye.